Which one of these do you think is the most religious state? And just circle it for me if you could. We don't have to talk about religion, okay?
Okay.
Because I know that's kind of one of those topics that people get uncomfortable about. Yeah. Some think that God drew the American map. Oh, interesting. We're a nation of believers and non-believers.
I'm good with this one.
Okay.
I have opinions about this.
And the freedom to believe what we want, where we want, has shaped many of our states. Kansas was torn apart by a holy war.
This game today commemorates a time of actual warfare.
Utah could have been bigger than Texas. And Massachusetts had big plans, but fell into little pieces. What do they all have in common? Whether it's fighting for turf or keeping the faith, they were shaped by religion.
That's a good Utah.
It's the history hidden in our map, how the states got their shapes. In this episode, Church and States. Why is it that we're not supposed to talk about religion at the dinner table?
Why is it a touchy subject?
It is the basis of our core being.
I think religion is a no-no for dinner conversations because it's rooted in belief rather than opinion.
You're talking about your essence.
You're so personal.
Yes, very personal.
Opinions can be swayed, whereas a belief is usually, you know, somewhere rooted in blood. You know, like,
deeply held.
Yeah,
and easily offended, right?
Right.
We may not want to talk about it, but religion has had a mighty influence on the American map. Religious influences have impacted the size, the shape, even the location of some of the states on our map. Some shapes tell stories of groups that fled religious persecution, while others hide scars of violent moral battles. Take Kansas. This state's eastern border with Missouri was once a bloody battleground. In fact, feelings here run so deep that more than 150 years later, the two states reenact their conflict every year.
Football is often compared to warfare, but this game today commemorates a time of actual warfare, a violent, bloody struggle between Missouri and Kansas in the years leading up to the Civil War.
We're at Arrowhead Stadium, ready for the MUKU game, the border war.
You're dressed in a very subtle fashion. It's not like anybody can tell what side you're rooting for.
MU fans tend to be a little hateful, a little spiteful, a little vindictive.
No. Missouri fans have class.
We're proud Missourians. We have to hate Kansas. Born and raised.
This is not a friendly rivalry. This is a battle.
It's war. This is war.
Fierce rivalries are nothing new in college sports, but it's a special kind of rivalry that inspires so much passion and so much bitterness that fans on both sides call it a border war.
So what's the deal? Why do Kansas and Missouri fans hate each other so much? 1854. Kansas is just a territory, but it's itching for statehood. Trouble is, it's a really bad time to become a state. The North and South are squaring off over slavery, and Kansas is caught in the crosshairs. Settlers here are faced with a tough decision. Should they vote to allow slavery in their state or not? Suddenly, Kansas is overrun.
People from both sides flooding into the state to try to make the vote go the way they wanted. Paramilitary units fighting each other, lots of blood, and it actually became a kind of a holding war that was taking place prior to the big one that broke out with the Civil War.
Ground zero in this holy war was this border. On one side, Missouri, a slave state. On the other, Kansas, where anti-slavery feelings ran high. This fierce rivalry burns to this day.
This is a game between two states that been fighting since the Civil War.
Kansas was against slavery, and Missouri was a slavery state. Yeah.
They're slavers.
They're slavers, man.
The ruthless border fighting even gave the Kansas team its name.
Some of the Missouri houses that had slaves, some people from Kansas came over and burned those houses, and they were called Jayhawkers.
The Missouri Tigers were actually a unit in Columbia, Missouri, that were just there to defend the town.
They came over and burned over Lawrence. They burned it down to the ground completely, and there's a huge amount of animosity.
It's still bad blood.
Most of us are packing, though, just in case.
So what does all this bitter fighting over slavery have to do with religion? Well, the anti-slavery forces were fueled by a movement back east that was steeped in religion, the abolitionists. Many New Englanders believed slavery was evil, and they felt it was their mission to destroy it. Leading the crusade in Kansas was a radical militant named John Brown. In one raid, his followers hacked 5 pro-slavery settlers to death with broadswords, all in the name of God. History has labeled John Brown a terrorist, but some people in Kansas still call him a folk hero.
Religion played a big part, at least for John Brown.
For John Brown, religion was the major reason. He believed that all men were brothers under God, and how could you justify owning your brother? So how can you tolerate slavery, and how can you tolerate the expansion of slavery? You must work against slavery to destroy it. This is where John Brown learned that white men would fight and risk their lives to free black men.
People on both sides of the slavery issue are now killing one another. And Kansas becomes so bloody, it's called Bleeding Kansas. But I thought the Civil War started somewhere else.
Boy, you've been misinformed.
Imagine that.
John Brown's anti-slavery movement would triumph in Kansas and help give the state its shape. 1861, Kansas joins the Union as a free state. 2 months later, Southern rebels attack Fort Sumter, the official start of the Civil War. Kansas and Missouri continue their border battles, cementing the fierce rivalry that still rages today.
I hate Missouri!
You can't exactly run over there with guns anymore, so we'll take them down on the football field.
The first Kansas-Missouri game was in 1891. At the time, survivors of the border war watched their sons and grandsons battle on the gridiron. So football became forever linked to a holy war that sparked the bigger Civil War and left a battle scar between two states. And that's how religion helped shape Kansas. Travel around the states and you often see where true believers made their marks on the map. You also notice how different religious beliefs affect us indirectly, in more ways than you might think.
Let me ask you this. There are all kinds of little quirky laws. They call them blue laws in some states.
What's a blue law?
You know those things where you can only buy booze on certain days? You can't drink at a certain time.
You can't take an open beer out of here because if you walk down the street, they're going to pull you over and say, oh.
That'd be an open container.
Exactly.
Well, you can't buy beer until noon on Sunday unless you're in a restaurant.
You can't buy liquor on Sundays.
Oh, but we never run out, so we don't have that problem.
Oh, okay. Is the purpose of the law then to keep people from drinking beer or buying beer?
I think it's crap.
I was going to say when church lets out, but you think it's crap. Okay.
Check out some of the blue laws on the map. 14 states forbid liquor sales on Sunday. They're scattered across the country, like Connecticut, Mississippi, and Montana. Illinois outlaws 2-for-1 drinks, while Massachusetts bans happy hours. So where do these blue laws come from? They started with the Puritans in New England. But Puritan blue laws were aimed at controlling morality, kind of like a set of God's rules for upright behavior. They didn't apply to booze. Puritans, in fact, drank more beer than water. Laws against alcohol really took off after the Civil War. And not in Massachusetts, but back in Kansas. I'm in Lawrence, Kansas, a town that was burned by people from Missouri back in the days of the Holy War. Lawrence, Kansas wasn't founded by farmers or frontiersmen. It was settled by anti-slavery activists from New England, and that's why this main drag through town here is called Massachusetts Street. When the religious New Englanders came to do God's work in Kansas, they didn't stop with the battle over slavery. After the Civil War, they took on the evils of alcohol. Kansas led what's called the temperance movement. It banned the sale of alcohol in 1881. The war on booze spread until every state on the map was under federal prohibition. Here in Lawrence, the religious crusade lasted so long, this brewery couldn't open until 1989.
It would seem to me this would not be a great state to say, I want to start a microbrewery. Were there still people here who still say, we think what you're doing is morally wrong?
When I started doing this process, I did actually get hate letters anonymously explaining that I was doing the devil's work and I was going to burn in hell. That's an
very
extreme
subtle message.
Yeah, that's an extreme example of that.
But it was a lot worse here 100 years ago, when booze was illegal. Religious zealots had an axe to grind. Carrie Nation, a Kansas crusader, liked to bust up bars with a hatchet. The whole state was officially dry until 1948, long after the rest of the country fell off the wagon. Before Prohibition, Kansas had 130 breweries. Today, thanks to Chuck, there are about a dozen.
It goes back generations in your family, and you decided to start up a brewing company.
This was not an oddity. We took a break for about 100 years, and now we're ready to go again.
Today, Kansas still has 19 dry counties, and it's not alone. If you trace dry counties across the map, you'll see how religion shapes the states in new ways. The South is truly parched. But don't be fooled. Even northern states that look wet are dotted with blue laws. So that's how religious activists took a whack at alcohol, started a movement in Kansas, and gave the states whole new shapes.
You know, a lot of our map here was influenced by religious groups.
Okay.
Can you show me on the map which states were most influenced by religion?
I would say over in this area, probably from the Church of England.
Of course, some of the original states in the...
Well, Massachusetts, of course. You have the Pilgrims, Puritans.
The English and foreigners began to move in those areas for the purpose of religious freedoms.
It's one of the biggest mysteries on the map. How did New England get carved into tiny, weird-looking shapes? The answer? Easy. Just go to Pennsylvania and follow the Amish. To see how the Amish relate to New England, you have to go back in time to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where religion turns back the clocks daily. The Amish settled in Pennsylvania almost 300 years ago. And when you catch a glimpse of them here, it almost seems like they're still living in the past. They're hard to miss. Horse-drawn buggies, wide straw hats. They embrace simplicity and shun technology. Why? Well, finding the answer is gonna be tricky.
Trying to interview an Amish person with a video camera is virtually impossible. revealing one's identity publicly through any kind of electronic means and exposing themselves and their way of life to anyone. They don't go together. So what I did is I stalked these buggies through the streets of Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. Oh, there's a buggy right there. You appear nonchalant, like you're just sort of driving slowly, 15 miles per hour or so. And you approach them, and they immediately turn away and run away from you. So really, the challenge is getting anyone in Amish country to share anything with you other than apple butter.
From a distance, the Amish look just like they did when they first came here in 1736. You won't see them using cars or electricity. Technology is a big no-no. But wait a minute. Isn't that a cell phone? Isn't that against the rules? Well, it looks like I won't find the answers here. So I'm off to Philadelphia, where I'm hoping to find some Amish who may be willing to enlighten me. Ah, bingo.
I didn't have much luck talking to any of the Amish people in Lancaster County, so I came here to the Reading Downtown Market in downtown Philadelphia. You're the only Amish person who would actually talk to me on camera. Why is that?
Well, it comes from the Ten Commandments about a graven image. Our people are normally not very outgoing as far as talking to the outside world, so there's not a lot of information that gets out to the public except for some tourist books and things like that.
This is kind of a paradox to me. You're very out front and center, and you're selling things, and you're engaging the public, and you're building a brand.
Yes, we believe in heaven and hell, but we also believe that when you're on earth, you have to survive. If you can separate your business from your home, your private life, it's okay.
So basically, it's a myth that all Amish are technophobes. Here, while doing business, they use electricity and cell phones. But where do they draw the line?
You have to embrace certain tools, modern, contemporary tools, to make your business work.
Yes, you have to use a certain amount of technology to get along in business.
Do you think generations coming up behind you will embrace it more than you do now?
Most of that I'm out of tune with, but I see it coming in.
You do?
The younger people.
Okay, so if Dad's willing to bend with technology, what does that mean for the kids?
Do you have an iPod?
I have an iPhone.
An iPhone?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So texting is not unheard of.
No, it's not unheard of.
It's not unheard of. Do you reach for your iPhone a lot and like look down at it and see what messages are coming?
Oh, Facebook, definitely.
Facebook?
When I'm bored, yeah.
Yeah.
It just depends what family you come from. We're all different. And my dad's a lot different than a lot of people's parents.
Your dad's cool.
Yeah.
You know, you have like the cool Amish dad, right? Do your friends think he's cool? Like,
yeah, they do.
We're just people. Our lifestyle may be different, but we're still just people.
Who knew that some Amish use Facebook and iPhones? Clearly, they're not all as strict as we think. Some even use telephones at home, but keep them outside in shacks called phone shanties. So what does it all mean? Well, the Amish are growing and branching out, and you can see it on the map. From the roughly 3,500 Amish who settled in Pennsylvania, there are now about 250,000 spread across 28 states. And as the Amish spread, they shaped new communities with new attitudes and rules. Sound familiar? The same thing happened in early America and splintered New England into those funny little shapes. Like the Amish, the Puritans came from Europe to escape persecution. It's the story of how religion carved our first states.
In the founding of the American colonies, religion was absolutely critical.
It was one of the things that drove people out of England across the wide, cold ocean to North America.
Back then, Massachusetts looked like this. It stretched clear across New England. Its story begins with the Pilgrims. Or was it the Puritans? I can never keep those two straight.
The difference between a pilgrim and a Puritan is what? You seem like a really intelligent guy, so we thought we'd save that one for you.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Can I stew on it for a moment?
Sure you can.
I never learned that in school yet.
You haven't learned it yet?
Yes.
Probably coming up.
Yep.
In your sort of American history class?
Yep.
They're both coming from England to get away from the Church of England. They're coming here for religious freedoms.
The Pilgrims were the people, the Puritans were how they lived.
Okay.
Right?
Well, I think the Puritans may have had a little bit more on the religious side, where the Pilgrims were just immigrants coming from different parts of the world. The Puritans were a little more strict on their religious beliefs.
They're both Protestants. Pilgrims want to be known as separatists. We are separating from the church. Puritans want to purify it from within, make it a better church.
I know there was a big rock involved. I think the rock is where the transition happened.
So how did Massachusetts break into pieces? 1620, the Pilgrims land at Plymouth Rock. 9 years later, the Puritans arrive at Salem. The two groups merge and spread across New England. But it's not long before they start bickering. Their faith fractures, and the cracks are what carve today's state lines.
So one thing we can see in looking at these boundaries in New England is that religious convictions played a very strong role in where they're actually located.
One rebel, Roger Williams, leads his followers to form an even purer settlement of Puritans.
He was so Puritan, he was too Puritan for the Puritans in Massachusetts, and they kicked him out. He came up with this conclusion that people should be able to practice whatever religion.
This new group settles on an island that would give the future state its name, Rhode Island. So this is where true religious freedom in America was first established. The bickering Puritans end up splitting into 4 colonies. But Massachusetts holds on to Maine until 1820. And that's how religion shaped the states of New England.
Well, I want to talk about Pennsylvania if we can.
Okay.
And what kind of gave Pennsylvania its shape? Alonzo, are you aware of who founded this state of Pennsylvania? Do you know what people or what order or what religious group came here and started it all? Or at least was one of the first religious orders to settle here? They're known for a certain kind of oaths.
Was it the Quakers? No?
The Quakers?
That's correct.
I would have to say the Quakers.
It was the Quakers. Congratulations, that's exactly it.
Who are the Quakers, and how did they shape Pennsylvania? Well, it turns out the Quakers were real movers and shakers. They not only changed the map, they helped shape our country with some pretty radical ideas. Like equal rights for women, fair dealings with Indians, and religious freedom for all. But one righteous idea went terribly wrong.
Religion shaped so much of our nation's history, its culture, and our values. But you may not know that religion also shaped our prisons.
This is Eastern State Penitentiary in the heart of Philadelphia. Inspired by the Quakers, the prison was built in 1829 as a new way to reform prisoners and make them penitent. It's where we get the word penitentiary.
One wouldn't assume that religion is a fundamental building block of this prison, but it is.
It is, yeah. The building had a spiritual mission when it was first constructed. It was based on the Quaker idea that people are inherently good, And if they spend enough time in isolation, they'll look into their hearts and they'll become penitent. They'll become remorseful.
What was it like here?
Well, you have to imagine incredible silence. They housed one inmate per cell. If you look at how thick the door jambs are, there's about 18 inches of stone between each cell. They were so fixated on silence in this building, they had the officers wear socks over their shoes. So when they walked down these corridors, they wouldn't make a sound.
It seemed like a good idea at the time. It was hatched in the home of Ben Franklin, inspired by the Quaker belief in the power of a direct relationship with God. This penitentiary concept was called the Pennsylvania system, and it was soon copied around the world. Even the prison's architecture looks religious. It's more like a monastery than a prison.
These lights that are up here, were these in every cell like this?
There's skylights in every cell. What's creepy about them to me, though, is there's never any windows. Nothing ever looks out. Everything looks up. So you can never see the horizon. You can never get a sense of where you are on Earth. All you can see is just sky. And that symbolism was very intentional. If the light of God was going to come down across these men.
Is this place considered a success or not?
It was a success in convincing people all over the world that you could build a prison that would improve the character of a criminal. But what they were actually doing here, housing men and women in isolation as a way of making them look into their hearts, was a disaster. It was a terrible idea.
It turned out that the total silence drove some inmates crazy. So Eastern State Penitentiary discontinued the practice in 1913. It stayed open until the 1970s, holding notorious criminals like Al Capone. But what does this have to do with the shape of Pennsylvania? Enter a wealthy Quaker and a very big debt.
Do you remember the man, or at least the name of the man, who invited the Quakers to come here? The man atop the building behind you. Go ahead and look. Back there.
Oh, right.
Over your left shoulder. Do you know who that man is up
Benjamin Franklin? No.
there? A lot of people think it's Benjamin
I
Franklin.
can't really see that well.
I know, it's the weather's not cooperating.
I'm going to say William Penn.
That's correct, William Penn.
William Penn, I know.
You
founded. I know that much.
Okay.
I don't know why it was founded.
Here's why. The British Crown owed William Penn a large debt, so the king paid him with Pennsylvania. 1681, Pennsylvania joins the British colonies late in the game. It's a little bigger back then, but it also has one big problem. The new colony has no window on the Atlantic. Its only lifeline to the sea is a river that runs through the colony of Delaware. And there's a problem with that too. Maryland was granted the same land.
If you look at a map of Maryland, you might wonder, why is Delaware not part of Maryland? In fact, it was part of the colonial boundaries of Maryland.
To Delaware's Protestants, the liberal Quakers in Pennsylvania are preferable to the Catholics in Maryland. The English king rejects Maryland's claim and lets Pennsylvania govern Delaware. So William Penn helps set the shape of Pennsylvania. But he does a lot more than that. His Quaker beliefs help shape the foundation of our country.
The Quakers of Pennsylvania had a profound influence on the country, and that was that when the Amish came, when the early Jews came, Pennsylvania was a welcoming colony and later state for them to settle in.
Penn's government guaranteed religious freedom. Instead of splintering into smaller religious states, Pennsylvania stayed as one big state, open to all faiths. Coming up, a new religion goes west and tries to carve out a state bigger than Texas. If you could, draw the state that we're in. Simple enough, right? Draw Utah, if you would, please.
Okay.
Let's see. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's nice. That's a good Utah. What do you know about the makeup of the state in terms of its population?
Well, aren't they known for Mormons?
They are, yeah. I'm high above Salt Lake City, the capital city of Utah, the incredible shrinking state. The land of the Mormons, once stretched from central Colorado all the way to southern California. But a skeptical Congress in Washington, D.C. had other ideas. Utah used to look like this, and it was called Deseret, before it shrank down to this. So what happened? To understand how Utah was shaped by religion, you have to understand the people behind the religion. Today, Mormons make up more than 50% of the population. But what do we really know about them? Well, if you look around, you'll see how Mormons put a different spin on life, and it's connected to how Utah got its shape. Take this store. It seems obvious what they're selling, but it's not what you're thinking. If you were to wander into this store, you would think you're in a camping store, that you're going to get some freeze-dried food there that would be great on a camping trip with your kids. But then you realize that this is targeting Mormons, and the only people in there are, for the most part, Mormons. Turns out they're not buying camping gear. They're shopping for Armageddon. Mormons are taught to store enough emergency supplies to survive the worst kinds of calamities. This goes just beyond the practical, be prepared for bad weather, be prepared for a natural disaster, right?
Yeah, it's all about being self-sufficient, being able to provide for yourself, whether it be a natural disaster or whether it be financial hiccups. It's really pretty much a commandment for us to be prepared in these types of ways.
This idea has its roots in early Mormon teachings, which instruct church members to prepare for Armageddon and the second coming of Christ. Today, the message is less gloomy, but Mormons are still encouraged to stock enough emergency supplies to last a year, even in a small apartment.
So 43 pounds.
43 pounds, 19.5 kilograms.
I don't know if I need quite 43 pounds of soup mix.
Do you have like a first aid kit too in your stuff?
Yeah, I do have a first aid kit.
2 pounds of regular rolled oats for $4.50. You can't beat that with a stick.
I have in my cupboard some year-old crackers, some rice, some stale peanuts, and a bag of flour.
Creamy gravy with sausage.
Oh, wow. This is like date night right here.
This is guests for the weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a lot of gravy.
Kidding aside, not all Mormons expect the second coming, but they are raised with a survivalist attitude, and for good reason.
Had a great deal of difficulty getting along with their neighbors and vice versa, and they wandered from upstate New York across the Midwest until finally they decided they would not be safe in the United States at all.
So the Mormons fled the country to find a safe haven in Mexico.
They established their colony, their city, in what other people would have called the most God-forsaken place, precisely because no one would come there. And precisely because it was outside the United States. It was beyond American jurisdiction.
But not for long. 1848, the U.S. wins the Mexican War and gains Mexico's northern territory, including the Mormon settlement around Salt Lake. The Mormons, now back in the U.S., try to form their own state called Deseret. It's gigantic, nearly 4 times the size of present-day Utah. So how was Deseret reshaped into Utah? To find out, I'm headed to Salt Lake Temple, into the heart of Mormonism.
What preceded Utah was a place called Deseret. And I've seen the word Deseret around Salt Lake City today. What's the significance of that?
The word Deseret comes from the Book of Mormon, so a religious text for the Mormons. Simply means honeybee, and it signifies sort of industry. The same way that bees work together to build a hive, Mormons work together to build God's religious kingdom.
A religious kingdom here in America? When it came to the Mormons, the U.S. government said, no way.
There's always tension between the Mormons and the federal government because the outsiders, the federal government, Congress, looking at the Mormons and saying, you're establishing something that's un-American. You don't fit our definition of what it means to be an American. We will keep you outside as a territory. We won't allow you as a state until you Americanize, until you become what it means to be an American, until you give up polygamy and abandon theocracy, then we'll allow you into the sisterhood of states.
Congress renames Deseret Utah after the Ute Indians. The new territory is much smaller than the Mormons planned, but Congress goes even further.
You can actually see Congress doing one of two things or doing both. One is cutting this Mormon state down smaller and smaller because they feared the loyalty of the Mormons to federal authority. The other side, one might say, is that every time a resource was found, gold or silver, in the Utah territory, Congress would redo the line and take it away from Utah.
1858, miners strike silver to the west. Utah is cut in half to form Nevada, which gets the silver. To the east, there's gold. But Colorado wins the mines, and it too gets a hefty slice of Utah. Finally, Wyoming takes the last bite and gives Utah its notch. But after all this cutting, Utah is still denied statehood, and the final showdown will hang on religion. Coming up, the Mormons fight for Utah and give dating a new twist.
So if I had this awesome NICMO last night, it means that I made out with someone with no strings attached.
Right.
The fight for Utah has cut the territory down to a quarter of its former size. Yet the Mormons are still without a state. Why? It comes down to religion. And the problem is polygamy. The U.S. government rejects the Mormon Church for urging its members to take many wives. Their leader, Brigham Young, has as many as 55.
It's a battle over traditional marriage, and the Mormons have radically attempted to redefine traditional marriage in the 19th century, and Congress says, no, you can't do that. So 1890, the Mormons begin the process of abandoning polygamy, and by 1896, Utah has Americanized enough to be admitted into the Sisterhood of States, and Utah is admitted as a state in 1896.
The Mormons remain deeply linked to Utah. Even the state flag has a beehive on it, the symbol of Mormon culture. The church no longer supports polygamy, but it does command Mormons to replenish the earth with children. That means starting a family early. And here at Brigham Young University, it's led to some curious dating rituals.
Do people date here?
Yes, people date here.
They date here, but they're not allowed to, like,
most college kids,
Am I getting too personal?
No.
Okay.
I think...
Because I'm blushing a little bit.
That's okay.
A little bit.
Let's go, Brian.
Young people have to obey certain kinds of moral codes when it comes to dating.
Dating is kind of, you have to be careful on campus here at Brigham Young University, right?
There are rules, and some of those rules have nicknames.
On campus, we have a term called a NICMO. That's a non-committal makeout. So that's kind of the same idea as
so
hookup.
NICMO? How do you spell it?
NCMO.
We could go on dates. maybe make out after going on dates. It probably happened. Like,
We have a DTR on campus that's a define
Sure.
the relationship conversation.
Now, have you had one of these DTR moments?
I have.
And that is, again, what is it?
Defining the relationship.
Defining
Yep.
the relationship. There are women here, some have said, who are here for something called an MRS degree.
Oh, yes.
And do women here feel pressure to meet a guy in 4 years? I mean, because the clock is sort of ticking.
Yeah, exactly.
You will find very young married couples at BYU. You really are married?
yeah,
How old are you? You're so young.
23.
23? Let's say you've had a NICMO, you've had a DTR. Are you here for the MRS degree, or are you just gonna go out and have a career on your own?
I think if the right person came at the right time, I would definitely be happy to get married on campus, but it's not my purpose in being here.
There is an encouragement, actually it's a commandment to start a family early. Then you can have all the sex you want. It's not the religious kingdom they sought to create. But Utah did give the Mormons a chance to build a new society, like bees in a hive. And it's that connection to honeybees that gave Deseret its name and shaped the incredible shrinking state of Utah. But the shape of Utah hides an even bigger story, one that's driven by groups of people seeking religious freedom. That same history is hidden all over the map, from Utah to Kansas to Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. The right to believe what we want, where we want, has shaped our values, our culture, and our states.